Okay, so today's roundtable is about stalled engagement on the Korean Peninsula. And over the last few months, the Biden administration has rolled out a calibrated, practical approach to North Korea, and even stated its willingness to meet with Pyongyang anywhere, anytime, without preconditions. But North Korea has rejected these requests for engagement. And instead, Pyongyang has gone into complete lockdown mode against COVID and has turned to Beijing to help mitigate the impact of COVID, the impact of sanctions, as well as an overall crippled economy. So we're in this ambiguous phase where North Korea's unwillingness to meet with the United States raises questions about the Kim government's motivations, their fears, their concerns, and whether our approach and whether our best approach would be greater outreach, pressure, patience, or something else. And then, of course, North Korea's willingness to resume hotline channels also raises questions about whether North Korea is now trying to change the status quo in some way. So today we're going to talk about the stalemate. What factors are constraining the potential for engagement? What realistic steps can be taken to minimize those factors and increase the likelihood of productive engagement? And does COVID mean that there's nothing we can do until North Korea decides that it wants to reemerge or feels confident enough to reemerge? And then, are there risks to not engaging and simply being patient? And to address these questions, we have a great lineup of experts who will provide their thoughts over the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to Q&A. And let me just quickly introduce each of our speakers in the order that they will be speaking. First, we have President Kim Gi-jung, who is from the Institute of National Security Strategy in South Korea, and he will provide opening remarks. And then we'll turn to Ambassador Joseph Yoon, who is the Senior Advisor at USIP, who will also provide opening remarks as well. And then we have our panelists, who will each have about 6 minutes each to provide their thoughts, starting with Lee Gi-dong, who is Senior Research Fellow at INSS, Ambassador Kathy Stevens, who is President and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute of America. Then we have Yang Moon-soo, who is Vice President for Academic Affairs and a professor at the University of North Korean Studies. And then next is Marcus Garlauskas, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And then last is Na Hee-sung, who is the former president of the Korea Railroad Research Institute. So with that, let me turn it over to President Kim.
Thank you, Frank. It's been 2 years since I visited DC. It was sometime in 2019, I guess. That I'm very glad to be back to DC. One of my old friends in DC, asked me why all of a sudden you decide to visit DC. That reminds me that the question reminds me of the one thing. Our hotel here is not far from the Lincoln Memorial. 58 years ago, that Martin Luther King and his people visited Washington D.C. That he said that he came to Washington to cash a check, kind of a promissory note that the founding fathers of the United States promised to the black people. We came here not to cash a check, but we came back to Washington to share the information about Korean Peninsula. Maybe I would like to point out 3 things that I like to share our understanding about what kind of stage of the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, this is a South Korean's view. And the second is we like to share some kind of assumptions and interpretation about inside North Korea, not only in the, North Korean politics, but North Korean economy. And third part that we remember that on last May that our president visited Washington, D.C., and a long and great joint statement he made with the President Biden. That in one sentence that the South Koreans are very impressed that United States is going to support the South Koreans' dialogue, cooperation, and engagement with North Korea. So I like, maybe this is the time to initiate, to design and initiate and practice the so-called joint engagement toward North Korea. In terms of engagement, that before when we look back the history of a bilateral talk between the Washington and Pyongyang, we believe that it's still engagement. It is not a matter of rewording something to North Korea. We believe that engagement is something framework that we try to make North Korea stay within the frame of a certain commitment. So, how to design and how to initiate the so-called joint engagement of North Korea. Maybe South Koreans' role would be one, and maybe full coordination with Washington from Seoul is the second one. First of all, the current stage of the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Let me say in this way that when we look back the last 4 years under the President Moon Jae-in, when he announced that this is a time to begin a new stage of the peace process on the Korean Peninsula, but in a full year, right after he was empowered in May in 2017, that year was full of a crisis because of North Korean's provocations, launching missiles and nuclear test. But in 2018, we like to call that year was a year of hope. Some people described it as springtime is calm. But in 2019, when we look back, there was to South Koreans, that year was a year of patience. We have waited and waited until the outcome of the bilateral talk between Pyongyang and Washington, but it did not produce any fruitful result of the bilateral talk. So last year, we tried to search for some kind of a breakthrough because of the structure of the Korean peace process. It is there are two dimensions. One is international relations dimension, and another is intranational, inter-Korean relations, another one. So South Korea was actually searching for the new breakthrough in 2020, but it was aborted because of COVID-19. But this year, even though this is the last year of the President Moon Jae-in's term, but we believe that this is a good time to regenerate or reactivate the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Not high as the in 2018. So this is the time to talk, and maybe Washington, it is very much important to move to talk in more precise way to North Korea. The day that when we departed Seoul, that both North and South Korea, the government declared that the restoration of the communication lines in inter-Korean relations, that is very much symbolic. We interpret it in North Korea's acceptance, our proposal to restore the communication line is that this is a signal to Washington. They are ready to talk, but they're waiting some more specific, stance or attitude from Washington. So we brought, the expert on North Korean politics, North Korean economy, and the railroading, construction from South Korea. So I like to share some kind of information and interpretation and even assumptions about what is going on in North Korea. So I like to conclude my short remarks that probably the coming 2 weeks, just before the mid-August, would be very much important, not only for the South Korea, but also for the Washington, because of many, since North Korea showed its intention to resume the talk with Washington. So it is a signal not only to South Korea, but also to the United States. So we came here to share the information, share the assumptions about North Korea. So I'd like to, introduce my members of the delegation. Dr. Lee, as you said, Dr. Lee, he is expert on North Korean politics, as well as he is going to talk about the North Korean-Chinese relations. And Professor Young is a well-known expert on North Korean economy. And Dr. Na is former the president of the Korean Railroad Research Institute. Railroad is very much important items to talk about and to initiate. So that is my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Kim, and I think you make some excellent points about how despite the
원장님.
interest in engaging North Korea, there are always other factors, things that are going on in North Korea, COVID, the economy, things that are happening in the US that can always change our best intentions. Let me turn now over to Ambassador Yoon, who is calling in from Oregon. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Frank. And thank you, Frank, for putting a great panel together in such a short notice. A big welcome to, of course, our Korean colleagues. I'm sorry I could not be there in person, but the next best thing is to be linked via video. And as Dr. Kim mentioned, I see that our Korean delegation has brought with them an important piece of news, which could be very relevant to our panel today. And that's the provocative question of whose court is the ball in? Of course, the news is that over the past few months, at least, there has been exchange of letters between President Moon and Kim Jong-un, and that at least we have first piece of news, as Dr. Kim just mentioned, that the hotlines between the two countries will be reestablished. What is, of course, much more significant is what comes after the hotlines. And there seems to be some chatter among the circles that what could be next is perhaps an announcement that there will be a virtual summit between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, which would indeed be a very significant development, in my view, and probably the most likely, the best chance for President Moon to keep alive his very own initiative of 2018, resulting in, of course, the Panmunjom Declaration and the Singapore joint statement between Trump and Kim Jong-un. I think that would be quite significant for his own legacy to stay alive. My own view is I very much agree with Dr. Kim that this is an excellent time for renewed diplomacy between North and South Korea. Certainly, there will be plenty of naysayers in Washington. I have no doubt about that. And their knee-jerk reaction is that, there is nothing to be gained in another round of diplomacy. There is certainly no significant denuclearization that North Korea is prepared to do, and that another round would be only giving more legitimacy and more bargaining power to Kim Jong-un. And they would be very much worried that US and South Korea will be forced to give, the leverages that we have so far kept fairly intact, namely the sanctions. My own view is these pessimistic kind of outlook are quite mistaken. And let me give you 4 reasons why they are mistaken. The first is that in the absence of any serious diplomacy, I have no doubt we will have provocations from North Korea. I think they are now getting their capabilities in SLBM, submarine launched ballistic missiles. They're also getting their technologies on, multiple independent reentry vehicles, so-called MIRVs, and very soon they will have to test them, and we will be back to Obama years or the first year of Trump administration. Very unstable situation, unpredictability on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. My second point is we now need to admit among ourselves that the challenge of North Korea is now more about how to manage a nuclear North Korea than, than finding an immediate solution. Of course, the solution we all know is to denuclearize North Korea, but we're not going to arrive there quickly or persuasively, and we simply cannot get there. So I think the first step must be to seek North Korean behavior, to shape North Korean behavior. And the only way to do it is through engagement. And we've learned from, past experience, pressure alone simply does not work. And we've seen plenty of data. I think Victor Cha and CSIS keep that data that when we do engage North Korea, at least there is less chance of major nuclear device testing or ICBM, big missile testing. My third point is my own suspicion that North Korea might just be ready to talk. Frank has mentioned 3 enormous problems they have. COVID. I just simply don't believe they don't have any COVID. Their reaction, trying to keep it away, has been so dramatic and so extreme. I think they're seriously facing COVID problem. They're natural disasters that have led to shortage in food. And of course, sanctions is also biting in a very big way. And I understand, and I'm looking forward to our colleague talking about North Korean economy. But I would imagine there have been significant economic fallout last 2 years. So maybe something akin to desperation is beginning to set in North Korea. And in these moments, Pyongyang is likely to consider both provocation and engagement as a breakout tactic. And we should make sure that North Korea chooses engagement rather than provocation. My last point is I do believe Biden administration is well qualified. More than that, they are prepared to engage North Korea, but that engagement has to be somewhat shaped by South Korea And that shaping, I think, is quite important. You know, of course, ultimately, a lot of the decisions will be on Biden himself. To me, it's clear Biden has tremendous experience in foreign policy. In fact, I think in the last time the US had a president as qualified in foreign policy as Joe Biden, I have to look back to George Bush Sr. This would be the mid 80s or so. I think he has learned his lessons throughout the years, and now you see him using those lessons in getting troops out of Afghanistan, in how to manage China. And in that sense, I do imagine he himself will want to engage North Korea, but there has to be a strong case because they realize that engagement does have costs. And I think the job of convincing Biden was quite well done by President Moon, persuading Biden's team to recognize Panmunjom Declaration, persuading Biden team to acknowledge Singapore joint statement. I mean, you know, for Biden team to say Trump did something right, that was a difficult step. So I do think the challenge is there, but I do think the team is ready. So I wish you good luck, and I hope our experts can show us how we can get to a significant engagement path again. Thank you very much, and over to you, Frank.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now we'll turn to Dr. Lee Gi-dong, who will provide his assessments about the North Korean political state of play. I should also note that there are headsets available, so please use them if for translation. I believe, are we speaking Korean? Okay, yes. Not sure about the right channel, so you may have to toggle with it a little bit. But Dr. Lee, please go ahead.
반갑습니다. 방금 소개받은 국가안보전략.
Hello, I am Lee Gi-dong. I'm the Senior Research Fellow from INSS. And my research area is the elite structure and the power structure of North Korea. So the political situation in North Korea is my area of interest, and I will be talking about how the North Korea's national security strategy under Kim Jong-un regime changed over the last 10 years. Because I don't have much time, I will go over them briefly, and during the panel discussion, I'm hoping that I can give you more detail. So during the past 10 years, we can say that they have went through 4 stages. First stage was the building of nuclear arsenal period. The second period was a period of creating friendly external conditions. So the friendly external conditions that was created from 2018 to 2019. So during those periods, they focused on creating friendly external conditions. And from 2019 until the 8th Party Congress, they focused on safeguarding their peaceful environment. And right now, they're currently in the phase of trying to create favorable external climate. So this wasn't coined up by myself, but I tried to divide these 4 phases based on my study of what North Korea has been announcing. And as you know, in 2017, November, they tested the Hwasong 15, and they declared that their nuclear arsenal had been completed. And during this period, people were questioning whether technically they were really completed with their nuclear arsenal. However, that is what North Korea announced. And some offer suggestions that North Korea has prematurely declared completion of its nuclear arsenal in order to concentrate all efforts on economic construction. So maybe most people offer these such suggestions behind their announcement. And after they've completed the building of the nuclear arsenal, they believed that they needed to have a friendly external conditions for themselves to build their economy. So they went through the North Korea and South Korea joint summit and the summit between the United States and North Korea. And the third period was safeguarding peaceful environment. I think this period is very important. So after the breakdown of the Hanoi summit in 2019, in December of 2019, they held the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, and they proclaimed the head-on breakthrough strategy. And they said that they will be helping themselves. They will not depend on other countries. They will be self-reliant. And to do so, they will strengthen their internal strength. So that was what they said during this third phase, announced to strengthen their nuclear capability and advance their military power and focus all on efforts on building their economy on their own, which is also reaffirmed at the Eighth Party Congress. And they said that they will safeguard a peaceful environment. What this means is that North Korea is expressing its determination to maintain peace through their own nuclear capability and advanced military power. And based on those power, they will focus their efforts on building their economy. So after the breakdown of the Hanoi summit, this is sort of the North-style isolationist stance, in my view. What I want to pay attention to is that within only 6 months, last June, during the third plenary meeting of the 8th Central Committee of the WPK, North Korea declared that it will proactively create a favorable external climate for them. And we need to pay attention to this because this seemed to be heading toward strengthening North Korea's relationship with China. So what favorable means here is somewhat different from friendly environment and peaceful environment. I think this is somewhat different from that. They're using the expression favorable. So that means they're willing to be more agile and flexible. And it may suggest that it will utilize its allies such as China and Russia to gain leverage with Washington going forward. And they also use the expression proactive and responsible. And this is a slight step back from its power for power and goodwill for goodwill principle, which was mentioned on the 8th Party Congress. Power for power, goodwill for goodwill principle is sort of a tit for tat strategy. So, but when they say proactive and responsible, that means that they will not wait for anyone to act first. But it means that they will try to do something in order to induce change from the counterparty. So therefore, this flexibility and a retreat from the power for power, goodwill for goodwill principle implies change. So we believe that North Korea will pay close attention to whether combined military exercises take place and decide how to engage with the US, Washington going forward. So I think that North Korea's relations with China is very important. The two countries seem to be aligned in their strategic interest. In case of Li Jinjing, Chinese ambassador to DPRK, stated that, quote, building on the traditional China-DPRK friendship is aligned with our mutual interests and is our joint strategic choice. And Xi Jinping, president of China, said, quote, we will strengthen the strategic communication with my comrade, and I will continue to control the future direction of China-DPRK relations. So this means that North Korea can get economic support, and it means that North Korea can have a strong ally, and they can gain leverage in their relationship with Washington. So at the same time, in case of China, China has been very reactive in denuclearization. So now with the closer relationship, China can gain leverage with its relations with the United States. So the
그러니까 결과적으로
I'm sorry. Nevertheless, North Korea is well aware of being over-dependent on China, and so they are wary of that. For example, in the Rodong Sinmun, there is an editorial section, and they said that even though their bilateral exchanges increase, they will continue to be self-reliant and focus on self-rehabilitation. So they believe that they are aware of the fact that they shouldn't be reliant too much on China. So due to time constraints, I will wrap up here and give you more details during the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And you make a great point of that both sides really are strengthening their leverage and trying to create or safeguard a peaceful environment. And you can also argue that both sides have a calibrated approach. North Korea is acting on the principle of power for power, or engagement, goodwill for goodwill. And the U.S. side is also embarking on a calibrated approach, which is essentially the same thing. Sorry, I was having reverb in my ear, so I couldn't hear myself. Let me turn it over to Ambassador Stevens for her comments.
Well, Frank, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this very distinguished and timely gathering. I want to in particular add my welcome, although I'm sitting here in Western Montana, to my Korean friends who have joined, who have come to Washington. I think now more than ever, it's important that we have these face-to-face meetings, and I really appreciate the effort and the inconvenience still of travel like this, but of coming. You know, I know that the title of this seminar was set up as something like which court is the ball in? I'm not sure what sport we're playing. I have tennis in my mind, but that's just because I play tennis rather badly. But I thought I'd focus my comments on the this week's announcement by the DPRK of and the joint restoration of the hotline and some of the signs we see coming from Pyongyang, because I think that's their, since it was the U.S. who introduced this metaphor of the ball is in North Korea's court. I take this as Pyongyang's answer. We can see what kind of shot they've hit, and but if it's doubles tennis on the other side, I think they've hit it to South Korea. So anyway, not to belabor that metaphor too much, I want to say that I certainly welcome the fact that this hotline has been restored. I appreciate Professor Kim's and Professor Lee's observations, including Professor Kim's, that this is important, very important symbolically, and does suggest a readiness for outreach to Washington as well. certainly I think that if it comes out of North Korea's difficult situation, that seems pretty clear. But I think it's also coming in the context of what has been a very careful and quiet approach by Seoul and also by Washington. And so if we look forward to what should we be doing, I think I wanted to take a moment to say, I think over the last couple of months, to some extent, this is a result of some careful work that needs to continue. Seeking out channels of communication and persisting in those, being very restrained in what is said publicly. And as others have mentioned, and I would underscore, I think the fact that the summit that President Moon had with President Biden in May was not only successful by any measure, but I think it sent a very strong message about the strength of the overall alliance, of the relationship, of the commitment to work together that is at odds with the message that was coming in earlier years, which was certainly a commitment from the previous administration with respect to engagement with North Korea, but rather jarringly set at a time of very explicit expressed doubts about the strength of the alliance itself. So I think all of this has been important in setting the stage for what I hope will be some possibilities going forward. So just to be brief, and I think I've heard a lot of great ideas already, and I want to be brief so I can hear some more. I mean, in the short term, I do think that the inter-Korean avenue is the avenue that makes the most sense, whether it's with respect to global health work, vaccines, building on the 2018 Panmunjom Agreement. Of course, all of those things will, as has already been suggested, lead to some important and subtle decisions that will have to be made about things like upcoming military exercises, about sanctions waivers and others. But I think we need to be prepared to try to engage on those things, first between Washington and Seoul and more broadly, but also with North Korea. And longer term, I just want to reinforce, again, what President Kim has already mentioned, and that is, this is a process, and I appreciate him using the word peace process. I think that however we go forward, we have to have a long-term strategy. Sometimes we've used the word roadmap. I would stick with kind of process, and I think there are several strands to it. Because again, as Ambassador Yoon said, this is not an issue, the issue of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the issue of a lasting peace. These issues are not going to be resolved quickly, but there can be a sustainable process, and it has to have the strands of peace, including the inter-Korean as well as the international, as well as that of denuclearization and reduction of tensions. So how do you come up with those processes? Well, we've been through some of this before, and the problem has been not so much getting started, but sustaining it. And of course, there are problems sustaining it when we find a Pyongyang that is not ready to go forward with the agreements that have been made. But we've also had difficulty sustaining those processes and political consensus within the United States because of our own political process, and indeed within South Korea. So I would just point out that the other thing I think is going to be very important is to try to come up with a sustainable process. It's going to see us through South Korea's own political season coming up, and is going to be capable of getting the kind of support. And here I'm actually, even in our very polarized environment, somewhat optimistic that we can have some broad support in the United States, notwithstanding the naysayers, which Ambassador Yoon mentioned, for a sustainable process working closely with South Korea and our other allies and partners going forward. So my final thought, I guess, is I'd give up on the sports metaphor, but I was actually thinking today, so I'm in Montana, I've got more time to think about two games, neither of which I know very well, but one, of course, is Western chess and the other is Paduk. And, you know, how would that fit in? And I was thinking about the fact that, as I understand it, well, you know, in chess, the opening move is very, very important, but you only have 20 choices, but it really can sometimes set the whole game. And in Paduk, my understanding is there are 361 possible opening moves, but the opening move matters a lot less. What matters more is what happens in the middle of the game. So I say that to say maybe this is going to be a little bit more like a game of Paduk, and that we have to be in there for the long haul. But I would take North Korea's and South Korea's announcement of this hotline as an excellent opening move. But we are into a very complex set of variables and circumstances that we're going to have to work together closely on in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you, Ambassador Stevens, for the very concise prescription of the way forward. Let's turn to Dr. Yang now for his assessment, I believe more on the economic side.
예, 감사합니다. 예. 예, 알겠습니다. 예. 예. 북한 경제를 보는 여러 가지 시선들 그리고 논점들 중에서 이제 하나의 측면에 초점을 맞추어서 간단히 말씀드리기로 하겠습니다. 지금으로부터 5년 전이죠. 2016년 북한의 7차 당대회, 김정은 시대에 들어와서 36년 만에 처음으로 당대회를 개최를 합니다. 그리고 국가경제발전 5개년 전략이라는 사회주의 경제 전통의 그런 장기 경제계획과 유사한 것들을 36년 만에
And
그때 이제
the 35-year economic plan was announced. There were several tasks that they announced, and first is to diversify their trading partners. And according to the internal documents that was not disclosed at the time, it said that we need to be vigilant of being overly dependent on China. And they come up with this statistics. In 2014, North Korea is doing 71.6% of its trade with China, and this is not desirable at all. And at the time, the Korean government was forecasting that its dependency was actually about 90%. We don't know which statistics is more accurate. However, it is meaningful that North Korea was aware of being overly dependent on the Chinese market. And now, since then, 5 years have passed. What has happened since then? Let's go over the past 5 years. There are sanctions and COVID. Due to COVID, there is a border lockdown. And as you can see from the graph, North Korea is recording negative economic growth. In 17, 18, 19, up to 2020, they are recording negative economic growth. And due to the border close down caused by COVID, you can see that North Korea's import and export against China is declining. The orange line shows import and blue line shows export. And after COVID, you could see that the import is declining very sharply. And next is the financial situation of North Korea. You can see the budget income. Until 2020, it was maintaining status quo, but this is the budget plan, and the budget plan is receiving pressure, and you can see that it is going toward a downward direction. And let's look at the agriculture. North Korea's agriculture situation has always been difficult, but in 2017 and on, you can see it is recording minus 2.5 and minus 3.0, and it went up 1.8. Then last year it recorded minus 5.2. So you can see that during the COVID situation, their food production is declining very sharply. So the overall economic sanction, and due to COVID, North Korea's economic situation is in more difficulty. And like Dr. Lee mentioned, they are at a standpoint where they need to decide whether to depend on China or not. 5 years ago, they were willing to reduce their dependency on China. That is the only way to survive. But they are now coming back to that strategy of depending on China because they have no choice. So they are now at a point where they need to decide whether to turn to China or not. So on the outside, when we look at the two countries, you think that North Korea is very friendly with China, but actually it's a very dilemma for North Korea because being overly dependent on one country is not desirable for any country, and North Korea is not exception. And so regarding North Korea's dependency on China, North Korea is very concerned, is what I assess. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang, for that overview of the economic situation. And of course, the question that we'll get to later on in Q&A is, what does that mean for North Korea's calculus, right? Let me turn it over to Mr. Marcus Karlauskas.
So I'll begin with the idea that, yes, I think applying game theory, as Ambassador Stevens mentioned, to the situation we're facing with North Korea is probably a reasonable approach. It's a helpful frame. And so I was struck by her comments, among others, and so it's given me a lot to think about and respond to. The way, though, I think we need to see this differently is that the game is far more complex. And the game, by the way, is not just starting. This is a game that's been going on for a very long period of time. And what we are seeing right now is just a tactical change, a single move, perhaps, in the midst of a game. And so thinking about what North Korea is hoping to accomplish and what it is doing in the context of reopening the lines of north-south communication, I think is really critical. And the larger context here is that North Korea has successfully reset the bar over and over again. To use the expression reset the bar, North Korea is changing the parameters of each time there's a re-engagement, each time there's a new conversation. In the background, so much has changed. And so, Doctor, your point on the North Korean economy is spot on. And so there's some things that have not changed, I would argue, in North Korea's favor. But there are a number of things that have changed in North Korea's favor in this longer term game that they are playing. And I think, in particular, viewing North Korea, as my friend Jo Yoon mentioned, as desperate, I think is perhaps the wrong way to think about it, if I can say so with all due love and respect for Ambassador Yoon. The North Korean people may be desperate. There may be North Korean party officials, frankly, that are desperate right now because their very lives and livelihoods probably hang in the balance of how North Korea is going to manage the situation. But if we think that Kim Jong-un is desperate, I think we are sadly mistaken, and we're proceeding from a faulty assumption. I believe, as difficult as some of the challenges that he's dealing with economically and dealing with COVID, I think there's good reason to believe that Kim Jong-un believes his position is growing stronger and not weaker. And I think if we don't consider that at least as a possibility going into this conversation, whether it's a bilateral conversation between the ROK and North Korea, it's a trilateral conversation, or it's setting the stage for a bilateral conversation between the US and North Korea, I think whatever one of those three possibilities is what's coming in future moves, if we don't approach it with that premise that Kim Jong-un thinks he's got the upper hand, then I think we're not going to be prepared for what's to come. I think when you look at, and there was a reference to Hanoi earlier, when you look at what transpired there and why things, to use the term, broke down, it was not a condition where you can necessarily blame the United States, you can blame President Trump. I think first and foremost, we have to consider the blame lies squarely on Kim Jong-un, who overplayed his hand, who believed that he had the advantage and he could force the issue, and that ultimately he believed that if it didn't work this time, or if he didn't get what he wanted at Hanoi, that ultimately he would get future opportunities to get to his same goal, perhaps in a different way, right? It was not an act of desperation. It was not Kim Jong-un coming to Hanoi from a position of weakness, but it was because he felt that he was in a position of strength, despite all these other matters, I think, that drove the way that things unfolded. So I could respond to some of the things that came before and expand on some of these points, but I'll only hit on a few. I think this whole idea of the fact that China and North Korea are now in a new place because of U.S.-China strategic competition is really a critical element. North Korea doesn't necessarily have to rely on China so much as all they have to do is rely on China acting in its own interest, right? It is in China's interest, unfortunately, in the context of U.S.-China strategic competition, to not necessarily cooperate with the United States, to support North Korea, to underwrite the Kim Jong-un regime, and to make denuclearization such a secondary issue that in the end, North Korea is not really going to feel significant pressure from China to make progress on denuclearization. So what does this mean? We need to have realistic expectations going into any dialogue with North Korea. And we have to think about what Ambassador Yoon said were the costs of engagement, and how do we minimize those costs, right? I'm not advocating for not engaging with North Korea, for stonewalling North Korea. Quite the opposite. As those of you who read some of my writing know, I actually am very much in favor of engaging with North Korea on issues even other than denuclearization. But you have to do so in a way that advances the goals of the alliance and advances a longer-term plan, rather than just reacting to the way North Korea has reset the table, and certainly without, in a way where you're paying a major cost in the larger game just to get to a conversation with North Korea. The very idea that we would consider canceling an ROK-US alliance exercise of any scale simply to get North Korea to talk to us, I would suggest is simply playing into Kim Jong-un's hands, right? He can use any level of ROK-US alliance military activity now as a justification for not talking, as a justification for why he has his nuclear weapons. He has reset the bar so much that just a simple computer-assisted exercise in which there are no movement of strategic platforms, there's no nuclear-capable systems involved, it's just a bunch of people sitting behind computers now, is considered to be something that we might want to hold off on, because it could provoke the North Koreans to the point where they won't come to talks. That shows you how much that Kim Jong-un has reset the bar. Another way in which we have to manage our expectations and think about how the bar has been reset is about the type of weapons testing that North Korea has been undertaking, the type of development they've been undertaking. The upside, the positive side, is that North Korea has not tested done an underground nuclear test since 2017, that they haven't fired an ICBM since 2017, since they declared complete their program, which of course, you know, is not complete. They keep talking about all the other things that they're going to do. Those things haven't happened, but let's look at what has happened, right? They continue to test ballistic missiles of increasing capability on the solid fuel front, weapons that can be used for a whole variety of purposes, conventional and potentially to advance North Korea's capability to deliver nuclear weapons. Ultimately, these systems provide Kim Jong-un over the long term potentially an option to conduct limited military strikes against very discrete targets with his nuclear capability and deterrent in the background to prevent a major regime-ending response from the alliance. So I see my time is growing short, so I'll try and be respectful here and recognize that ultimately The most important takeaway, though, that I want everyone in this room to think about in the terms of this conversation is, as we are going through trying to determine what North Korea had in mind by restoring North-South communications, let's remember how they ended. It was because North Korea blew up a liaison office and engaged in a level of threats and coercion that really should be completely unacceptable, to achieve an end in terms of changing the policy of the Republic of Korea toward informational efforts on North Korea. It resulted, let's be fair, in the enaction of a new law. A domestic change in South Korea was achieved through coercion against the Republic of Korea. And you know, I'm an American, so I can't walk in President Moon's shoes. There are reasons why he supported that approach. There's reasons why the National Assembly supported that approach, and we don't need to go into them here. But ultimately, it was a success. And having had that success now, a year later, North Korea reopens the lines of communication and has reset the bar now to a new place, and has advanced their longer-term game of getting acceptance for their nuclear and missile programs. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind.
Thanks, Marcus. I think your comments really highlight the question of how we escape this dilemma where both the United States and North Korea feel that they have the upper hand. At the same time, they're trying to increase their leverage and maximize their security. And yet they're both calibrating their policies based on the response of the other. We're in this, again, what we call the vicious cycle, right? Hopefully we can get to that in the Q&A. Let's go to our last speaker now, Dr. Na from the Railroad Research Institute.
네, 안녕하십니까? 저는
Hello, my name is Na Hee-seung. I am former president of the Korean Railroad Research Institute. So as an expert of train, I'll be talking about train. So before we headed to the United States, I heard the news that the communication line was back, and the restoration of the communication line, I believe, is that a green light for both the United States and South Korea. And along with the restoration of the communication line, in the midst of such a situation, I will be talking about the joint engagement or for the resume of the talks between the different countries. We believe that I want to start from the agreement that North Korea will have to agree to their commitments. There were some summits held between the two Koreas and between North Korea and the United States, and there were some progress made in the railroad projects. So I wanted to propose implementing the agreements made by the two Koreas through railroad projects. So in the early administration of Trump, we were at the height of tension at the time. And at the time, the two Koreas participated in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, and we were heading toward peace, and the peaceful atmosphere was created. And for April 27th, the Panmunjom joint statement and the September 19th Pyongyang joint statement was announced, and the Hanoi summit was broken off. And then COVID pandemic followed, so we were not getting anywhere since then. So in order for us not to retreat further, but to turn the tables, the two heads of state of the United States and Korea met, and President Biden supported Korea's, the two countries' intention to have a dialogue. And in case of North Korea, they believe we believe that North Korea responded with the reconnection of the communication line. And I believe that the peace train is now starting to move. And we believe that it is now the golden time to implement what has been agreed in the joint statement between the two countries. So I want to suggest to start with the railroad projects in order to implement the joint agreements. 3 years ago, the two leaders from the two Koreas met, and they have reached agreement for permanent peace. And in order to do a joint economic development, they did a groundbreaking ceremony to start the railroad projects. In order to implement the joint agreements, we believe that starting these railroad project should be done as fast as possible. And I believe the sanctions against North Korea can be relieved somewhat so that these projects can take place. And if the international train can be linked between Seoul and Pyongyang, we believe that peace can be achieved earlier than we expect. And right now, due to COVID, North Korea is now secluded. And due to these projects, the Busan will be linked to North Korea, and North Korea's market opening will be expanded. These are some of the expectations that we have from the results of the train project. I forgot to turn the slide. Sorry about that. And we believe that the logistics infrastructure can be shared with other countries. And through these efforts, we believe that the mutual trust and cooperation can be enhanced going forward. And the joint engagement and multilateral engagement, the achievements of these engagement can be shared amongst the different countries who are participating in this train project. I will skip the statistics. I believe that the peace leads to building economy. Economy leads to building peace, and eventually leading to virtuous cycle. And so, as was mentioned, the communication line was restored. And if we were able to link the train, we believe that sustainable peace can be established going forward. So we hope that more creative, flexible cooperation framework is needed. I hope that through the peace train, we can bring about a peaceful Korean Peninsula going forward. With this, I would like to close my presentation and go to the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Na. And I agree that inter-Korean cooperation on railroads and other areas is a promising line of effort to pursue. The question, of course, is how we address the specific needs that of both the United States and North Korea, the U.S. in terms of denuclearization measures, and then for North Korea, the end to what they call the hostile U.S. policy, right? This type of cooperation may be a catalyst, but I think ultimately we need to address the primary interests of the two main countries in the engagement process. So I want to thank the panelists for the remarks. We're at 4:13 now, and we started maybe 10 minutes late. So I hope it's okay if we go over 10 minutes. I want to make sure that we make this a true roundtable and get questions and comments from people here today. That being said, I will start us off because it's sort of a cold call, and I want to make sure that people can have some time to think about a question or a comment. And I'll lead us off by returning back to the original question about whose court the ball is in, right? Because I think both sides believe that they have provided their response. Secretary Blinken has basically said that the ball is now in North Korea's court. And of course, North Korea has responded with their basically their rejection of the U.S. offers. And so we're continue to be in the stalemate. And there's, of course, the promising signs about the opening of the hotline channels. But again, we're in a stalemate. Are we in a situation where there's nothing we can do because North Korea is still locked down due to COVID? Or is there more that we can do, whether in terms of pressure or outreach to jumpstart diplomacy. So let me start with that question. If any of the panelists have any quick responses to that question.
So Frank, you think that you agree with that ball is on the North Korean court still?
I don't know if I have a thought on that, only because I feel like North Korea has responded. So in that sense, there was an offer by the U.S. and the U.S. side responded.
There is very small scale of a behavior that we can watch. Sometimes South Korea is in a position to watch the both sides, in which court that the ball is in or not. But I don't have any intention to speak on behalf of North Korea or something. But North Korea believe in a big picture. In 2019, they show their intention to give up the Yongbyon. Then, what would be the Washington's response? They are waiting for that. So, in that sense, North Korea believes that its ball is on the U.S. side.
I'll just wait to see if any other panelists have a response, and then I'll turn to Dr. Lee. Did you have?
저는 공이 누구에게
Well,
있느냐?
the ball is in whose hand or whose court? Well, I'm not sure if I can respond to that metaphor, but I think we have to think as follows. When we say engagement, we have to follow certain rules of engagement. Engagement requires respect for the other. And also a try, at least, to understand the other side's perspectives. And this is a relationship that you must work on. And once there's a certain understanding of one another, perhaps there could be a better confidence amongst the participants. You say engagement, but you don't do any engaging activities. You say, like Mr. Glaucus, you say engagement is needed, but it should not be a tit for tat for every action that they make. I don't actually agree with that, because when you say engagement and you are not willing to engage in tit for tat, then you're not really engaging the other. You are actually not really responding to their actions. And when you give no response to whatever action that they take and say that you're still trying to engage, I don't think that is logical in terms of the approach that you're taking with North Korea. And you have also mentioned that the provocation with North Korea will continue. Well, ever since 2018, North Korea has followed their moratorium. They have not provoked to the level that is of concern. And there had been also a reduction in the military exercises between the U.S. and Korea, of course. So when you look at North Korea's actions, I can only say that they have tried what they can to not to provoke outside. And the sanctioning regime has worked. It has had effect on North Korea, the North Korean regime, and also on the people of North Korea. And so there are certain changes that have taken place internally in North Korea. And before they do any type of provocation, for example, a testing of certain types of weapons, they have not done it. I mean, they, for example, solid fuels, they have not prepared these solid fuels for testing of their missiles. So I would say they are actually holding off. They are trying not to provoke. So I don't agree, and I cannot agree that they will continue to provoke. I think the momentum is on the side of non-provocation, although I could be proven wrong eventually.
Thank you. I want to make sure that if people who are Ambassador Stevens and Ambassador Yoon, if you have anything to add, I don't have any way to know other than just if you raise your hand. So, okay, it looks like Ambassador Yoon has a comment, and then I'm just looking at the fingers here. Okay, so let me start with the lady here. Please introduce yourself when you speak. I want to get some comments and questions from the people who have attended today, but I haven't forgotten you, Ambassador Yoon, so we'll get to you eventually. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Contessa Bourbon. I'm a freelance journalist. I'd like to ask the panelists, how worse is the food crisis or hunger in North Korea? Is it possible for US and South Korea to help in giving food or helping in vaccines diplomacy as incentives to encourage North Korea to re-engage with US and South Korea? What is your view?
Thank you. Let's just hold off on that question, but it's basically a question about the food crisis in North Korea and using food nutritional assistance, but also the broader COVID assistance as well to engage with North Korea. There are some hands here, Bruce, and then Mark.
Thanks very much. Bruce Klinger from the Heritage Foundation. You know, we were using the sports analogy of what court the ball is in, which makes us think of tennis. And other sports analogy is, you know, football with Charlie Brown and Lucy and kicking the football, you know, one more time. You know, but as I think Marcus said, is, yeah, you know, we want to try engagement. You know, there's this dichotomy of sanctions or engagement. And I think as Ambassador Yoon said that pressure alone didn't work. I don't think anyone is advocating pressure alone. It's all part of a comprehensive integrated strategy using all the instruments of national power. But you know, the U.S., I mean, Ambassador Yoon, when he was in office, was trying to get engagement with the North. Sung Kim was when he was in that position, and all the other ones, representatives before and after. So the U.S. is trying to have engagement, Steve Biegun, et cetera. So right now, North Korea has been willing to pick up the phone at a bureaucratic level. We've had some exchanges of letters between the leaders. We don't know about what. The Blue House disputed the Reuters and Jungang articles that there was talking about a virtual summit. But, you know, we're trying to have dialogue. Now, because North Korea has not responded, there's often that tendency of what can we offer them as a door prize to get them in the room. I'd like to hear what North Korea would be willing to offer, since they're the ones that, you know, have been breaking the UN sanctions, et cetera, or UN resolutions. So, and on the moratorium, you know, the self-professed moratorium against ICBMs and nukes is pretty immaterial because they were already precluded from doing that under 11 UN resolutions. And in the last 2 years, they have broken those UN resolutions 35 times, you know, at a short and medium range level. They haven't done an ICBM and nuke, but they have been, you know, repeatedly violating. And then, you know, one last point is, you know, on engaging with North Korea economically, you know, we've tried with railroads under Kim Dae-jung, and I think he even rode the train to the north after he left office. You know, we've offered and you know, provided humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't change North Korea's you know, quest for nuclear weapons and missiles. That's not to say we don't try it again, but I think you know, we do need to have any economic provisions or benefits provided to them in the context of progress towards denuclearization. So certainly humanitarian assistance, it should be separate from, you know, the negotiations, but, you know, large scale economic benefits, I think, should be tied to progress towards denuclearization. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. technical question. It may be a naive one. The talk of the possibility of a virtual summit made me wonder how much COVID is really a hindrance to North Korea engaging. And I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure if anyone on the panel is qualified to answer this, maybe you, Ambassador Yun, but what are North Korea's technical capabilities in arranging sort of creative workarounds for not having diplomats being able to travel? Would that be telephonically or virtually? Would a virtual capacity be limited basically to the leader or a low level below? Or how far down would that go? So just a question if anyone knows about the technical barriers that not being able to travel would pose.
Let me turn to Ambassador Yoon to provide any previous comment he may have had, but also to address the question about food assistance, and then the potential for alternative means of engagement. So we know that North Korea has been conducting virtual meetings, certainly through the Chosun Exchange, but also at POOST as well. So Ambassador Yoon, if you could address all of those questions.
That's a lot of questions, Frank. Frank, if this were a tennis match, it would be someone like Djokovic versus Joe Yun. Okay, so it is absolutely certain who would win. Whether I would get one point, if that's the question. And I mean, I think that speaks to we should not set up North Korea and Kim Jong-un as this larger than life regime. Let's call it what it is. It's a failed state. It cannot feed its own people, and only thing it's got going for it, it's nuclear weapons. Okay, let's just make that clear. And to continue with this games analogy between North Korea and United States is quite frankly very, very misleading. And who has the upper hand? Who doesn't have the upper hand? I think that gets away from the point. And I really like Dr. Lee's comment. We have to understand the background they're coming from. And the background they're coming from is they cannot feed their own people. There's no question in my mind that COVID is there, and they have suffered tremendously on the natural disasters and climate change, which has led to food shortages. So for US to insist, you do this, we do that, we will not, talk to you under certain conditions. I mean, it really does remind me, and I worry, quite frankly, whether we are back to, at the end of Obama era, where we had so many conditions to talk to them that nothing gets started. So I do think, it is Djokovic to say, okay, you want to play tennis? Come on, go ahead, to tell me that. So I really do think the ball is in Washington. And so far, I am a little bit disappointed that we've not made a serious attempt to engage North Korea. I mean, sure, these are talking points we've used. We're ready anytime, any place, but without any content. And it reminds me, of, someone who is not interested in talking, but want to just keep the problem away, keep it in a box. And my own fear is if we try to keep it in a box, that sooner or later the problem's going to come out, as it surely did in 2017. And the last thing we want to do is go back to 2017 situation. Now, COVID makes it very difficult, but I think our diplomats can find a way out of that. And I have tremendous faith in the current lot who have so much experience in dealing with North Korea. And so I think they need some very strong marching orders. They need collaboration with South Korea to make sure we're managing the problem, So thank you very much. And I found discussions very useful today. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a bunch of hands down here. Let's start with this gentleman right there, and then Yun-Ho.
Stanley Kober. You might have seen, I'm sure people have seen the reports of China building more silos for their ICBM forces. So the question, how do we get China to cooperate with us on denuclearization of North Korea when the Chinese are themselves significantly increasing their strategic nuclear forces because they perceive a growing threat from the United States?
Yun-Ho Kim with George Washington University. I have one question for Dr. Lee Gi-dong and another question for Marcus. So the Moon Jae-in administration is in a situation where, as Ambassador Yoon pointed out, they have to make a strong case for engagement to the Biden administration. But from North Korea's point of view, they must know that the Moon Jae-in administration has a really long bucket list, while they're going to have another presidential election early next year. So from North Korea's point of view, that they would be wondering whether the next South Korean administration will keep trying to make a goal, if I use the sports analogy, or trying to move the goalpost instead, goalpost. So whichever the administration we're going to have, whether liberal or conservative, that's a big question North Korea might have. And my quick question for Marcus is this. I agree that in Washington we have a very deep-rooted skepticism and, in a way, North Korea fatigue, if you will, in Washington. And I also agree that we don't have to respond to North Korea's, single and short-term tactics. Having said that, I wonder if, Marcus, you have found any indications that you can share with us that the Biden administration has a long-term plan to deal with North Korea. Thank you.
Okay, so we're running out of time here, so unfortunately we can only take a couple more questions. So what I think I'll do is, there was a question on this end down here, and then I think Darcy had a question. We'll let them ask their 2 questions, and then I think some of them were addressed at specific panelists. So after they ask their 2 questions, I'll return back to the panelists, including Ambassador Stevens, for their final remarks, but hopefully in their final remarks also addressing any questions that were addressed to them. So let's start on this side.
Yeah, just a quick question. It may sound academic, but actually has serious implications both for Kim Jong-un's approach and for future broader U.S. policy. Would any of the panelists care to comment on the question of whether Kim Jong-un has been a student of what's called the Gaddafi lesson? When Gaddafi gave up his weapons of mass destruction, it is widely reported that he wound up in a ditch, with no way to defend himself. And if Kim Jong-un believes that, and does this also have obvious implications for our policy dealing with North Korea and other despots in the future? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Darcy Drow, and as of Monday, I'll be at George Washington University. My question is for Mr. Garlaskis, and perhaps Dr. Lee might also chime in on this. I was really struck by your analysis of thinking of how desperation motivates different actors within North Korea, particularly with party members, perhaps the military, versus Kim Jong-un not feeling desperate. And so I wonder, is there something to be done in targeting or the tactics that we would use for diplomatic engagement with North Korea, with that being the case, particularly since we have been focused so much on sustained mid-level negotiations? Is there something with thinking about their desperation differently? And then secondly, relatedly, what lessons would we have learned from past negotiations that might build on those, or what may we have learned from different negotiations in the 90s and the 2000s?
All right, and with apologies for those who had additional questions, again, I'm just concerned about being respectful of people's time. So I'm going to go back to the panelists, and I'm going to go in reverse order, starting with Dr. Na, and then we'll end with President Kim to provide any additional comment or to address a question that was addressed to you. And please, if you can, limit your comment to 2 minutes maximum. Thank you. Dr. Na, please.
철도와 관련해서는
In regards to the railroads, nobody's asking me. So I want to say, however, that we are at a very critical juncture when it comes to North Korea and the restoration of communications line. I hope that also transcends into the reconnection of the railroads as well. And I think this is an important opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
So the first thing I'd like to address is the Libya example. And I think it's a powerful one, and I think it's one that's resonating with the regime, and one that's frankly that they've actually cited among many others. And so yes, I think that is part of the calculus that leads North Korea to cling to nuclear weapons, and Kim Jong-un personally not to give them up. As to the question about the Biden administration's policy, I'm not in the Biden administration. I think they should speak for themselves. On this question of desperation, I think it's a fascinating one, but I would argue, and the professional diplomats may correct me on this, you can't have a negotiation when your negotiating partner is desperate. I think what you're doing at that point is you're just dictating terms. That's like unconditional surrender. I think expecting Kim Jong-un to be desperate is a very, very dangerous thing. We don't want him to be desperate because we don't know what he will do if he is truly desperate. And so as far as the lessons learned, we could have a whole nother probably conference on that. It's a great question. But I think the number one lesson learned is we have to think of each of these negotiations in the context of not trying to achieve a particular result in that negotiation, but how it advances the longer game and the longer interest. And I think North Korea has been more effective in that way. And I take the whole game theory, maybe we could go too far with that, but I think we need to think of this very iteratively and not in the context of just a short few set of moves, but how does this unfold over the course of decades? And I think that's the big lesson from the negotiations, is North Korea has taken a longer view. I think we're at least a more realistic longer view than we have. Maybe we've been too optimistic. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Dr. Yang.
예. 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 저는 이제 북한
When it comes to the economies of North Korea, whether the desperation is amongst the actual population of North Korea, and also whether the bureaucrats are desperate. Well, when we talk about dictators and despots, we talk in terms of the people suffering, and that they are always destitute and are suffering greatly under the despot. However, I beg to differ, however, in that description. In the case of Kim Jong-un's grandfather, there was a certain authority coming from the fact that Kim Il-sung was who he was. However, since then, coming down to Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, there were certain expectations that people had in North Korea of their leader. And people are not that destitute. They're not really that desperate. There had been times when their economies were doing better. They're not doing as well now, but there had been periods in the North Korean people's lives when they were doing well. So they have actually gotten into a relative destitution compared to the past. And when you start losing compared to before, you have people with the discontention that's been building up. And the biggest failure for Kim Jong-un from the Hanoi meeting was that Kim Jong-un was spearheading the negotiation, and he had boasted that he will bring back certain fruits of the negotiation, but he came back empty-handed, and he was humiliated in the eyes of his people. This was a major failure on his part. And so he's not the dictator as a strong man as he was before.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang. Ambassador Stevens.
Well, gosh, thank you. I've enjoyed the discussion. I'm struck by how we, over the years, and now many years I've been following this, I feel like we constantly kind of go back and forth between, in some ways, overestimating or underestimating the stability, the capability of the North Korean regime and the Kim dynasty. And that's maybe not surprising for a whole lot of reasons, but it is indeed a regime that has proved very resilient beyond most assessments, but also we know it's very brittle, and it's probably more brittle now because or in some ways, because of the pressures on it, but maybe it's making it more resilient too. So this argument will continue. But I think we should just try to get somewhere in the middle there, saying there are elements of weaknesses, but also to use another metaphor that's overused and but Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather played weak hands very well. I would even say this is something Koreans have learned to do in the very difficult positions they've been in over the centuries. But let's not overestimate or underestimate. And on the issue of just how do you engage in a negotiation, a process, and where are we in this? Again, I do kind of reject this idea that, well, we put out a proposal and they didn't answer, therefore they owe us an answer. Now, I have never seen a diplomatic process that works that way, ever. I mean, even with, dare I say, our allies, this again, whether I call it game theory or just a game, people are making their moves. And, sometimes our partners or our adversaries, they're thinking through what the history of this too is. They're thinking about what the next move is. We do need to be, I think, a little bit more strategic about that. But we also shouldn't be surprised when the same issues come up over and over again. It doesn't distress me that we're talking about, the North-South element is the one that Kim Jong-un has seized on to try to move forward. That makes a lot of sense. He's done it before. But my view would be, okay, let's see where we go with it. Not say, well, they haven't answered our mail, so let's, this must be very nefarious, and we've seen this all before. Of course, we've seen it all before, but we saw it all before in Northern Ireland, and the Balkans, and Iran. I mean, the issues don't change, but the circumstances shape, and that's when we get into these issues of shaping not just behavior, but shaping the context and seeing what opportunities there are, and that's what I hope we can do.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me turn to Dr. Lee.
감사합니다.
Thank you. First of all, regarding the possibility of the shifting the goalpost, my comment is this. Let's say there is a 50-50 possibility. I think it would be better to go for it rather than not do anything. I think that would be a more responsible way. I'm not sure which country is willing to initiate the shift of the goalpost. But anyways, that's my view. North Korea, another question is Biden administration changing its North Korean policy depending on how which administration or assumes office in the next presidential election? I think there can be two ways North Korea respond diplomatically. They can first lean toward China and be dependent on China. And second way is to have internally full control of their regime and become secluded. And I think the sanctions against North Korea is effective in hindering Kim Jong-un's trying to do. However, it shouldn't spill over so much that I think it's a different matter for getting giving up its politics, surrendering its politics. They will be they will resort to isolation rather than try to find the other way out. So this is my personal view. Even though the online summit occurs, I don't think it will lead to a tangible result. The Inter-Korean summit at the end of an administration is very burdensome for the Moon administration. There was one experiment, there was an experience in 2017, and there can be positive and negative aspects to that. So there are risks. So they have experienced failure 2 years ago. I'm not sure if Moon administration will try something and they will not risk another failure. So I don't think Moon Jae-in administration is foolish. And I think after the Hanoi, the two countries have come to a deadlock. But we can see that there are some agreements that they were reached. And what are some of the sustainable and attainable things that were agreed upon in the agreements between the parties? And can North Korea, if North Korea has the determination to implement what they agreed upon, I think there is a possibility of the Inter-Korean summit. But if that is not certain, I don't think the Moon administration will go through the summit at the end of his administration. This is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Let me turn to Ambassador Yoon. Any final comments?
Well, I was going to yield my time since I've spoken twice already to you and Dr. Kim, but let me just make one point, if I may. Sorry to take time again. That is, you know, for past few months, I've heard from our South Korean friends a very strong argument that North Korea and China, their relationship is becoming very close, and in fact, creating a lot of dependency on the part of North Korea. And of course, that's not in the interest of South Korea. But I'm not sure that same argument works in Washington to try to convince American policymakers, listen, these two guys are getting very close. I kind of imagine that many in Washington would say, that's great news, let it be their problem, let it be Chinese problem. So just to point out, this is where Washington and Seoul's interest might not be exactly the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's have Dr. Kim wrap it up.
Yes, let's wrap it up. Well, in the beginning, I forgot to say that thank you for hosting us. Especially thanks to the USIP. As Ambassador Yoon said, that sometimes we have to ask ourselves what is the eventual goal, how to deal with North Korea. And at this moment, we can say that our eventual goal to vis-a-vis North Korea and the United States and even to China is that we try to establish a workable, sustainable, peaceful environment, peaceful coexistence. Maybe, the jure unification in the near future is not an eventual goal. Maybe that was a very much remote goal. So, how to coexist peacefully with the neighbor countries, including North Korea, would be, South Korea's at this moment, South Korea's goal, not only to this Moon Jae-in government, but also in the whoever comes after the Moon Jae-in. I think that in our generation, we believe that antagonistic confrontation with North Korea, we are familiar with that mode, but we believe that that is not the only answer. That is not the answer to solve the problem of the divided status of Korea. Well, sometimes you're losing, whenever I visited Washington, that I understand North Korea fatigue. It is understandable. But in Pyongyang has maybe U.S. fatigue. But but sometimes I can witness that not only a fatigue, but in some cases maybe you are. All you can say is that North Korea hatred. Looking back the recent 10 or more years of what was Washington's response, stance toward North Korea, maybe the three types. One is inactive, no idea. Even though you used the beautiful term strategic patience. Strategic and patience is not easily combined, these two words. So it is inactive, no idea, no actions. During that period, North Korea developed its nuclear capability. And another is reactive with only fire and fury. I understand you're angry with North Korea, but it is only reactive. You have no idea about how to deal with North Korea. We need proactive and creative stance from Washington, not only to deal with North Korea, but to deal with Korean Peninsula. Korean Peninsula is like a heartland in Northeast Asia. If you lose ideas, a commitment, how to deal with how to manage the Korean Peninsula, maybe you will losing your ground in Northeast Asia. So I think it is time to think about the grand political game from the United States, creative game, productive game. So in that sense, you need to see the North Korea, how to handle North Korea. It is not a matter of a hatred. It's not a matter of the fatigue problems. And one more thing that everybody's trying to get some lessons from what we did in the past. 2019, no deal in Hanoi. South Korea is trying to get some lessons from why this kind of unhappy things happened. Maybe one of the lessons that South Korea learned during the stalemate is that full coordination with the United States is very much important. And persuading Washington is more important than ever. I think the North Korea is also getting some lessons from what they did in Hanoi. But then I think Washington, do you have any lessons during the stalemate? I think you have no interest to getting lessons. So I think it is a minor things you might consider, restoration of communication lines, but I think it is a big signal, even though the maybe only communication line, maybe you can say that, but in the meaning, significance is that it's very symbolic. So I think if you want to play political game in the region, how to deal with the China, maybe North Korea would be very much important for, maybe North Korea, how to handle North Korea would be a litmus test for your future strategy in the region of Northeast Asia. So nevertheless, we had a great time to discuss on many issues. Last word, as in the opening, Martin Luther King he came to Washington to cash a check. Well, and I think that we came to Washington in the midst of COVID-19. You may understand the inter-Korean relations. Korean problem has the dual dimensions. Of course, North Korean people who are residing on the northern part of Korea, we're sharing the same culture and same language, but in the different states. But we came to here not to appealing some kind of a nationalistic sentiment to the people in Washington. We came here because the United States is our ally. So how to manage peacefully on the Korean Peninsula, it is a common goal for the two ally states at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You talk about learning the right lessons. I want to bring up a story from Mark Twain, or guidance that he had about making sure that we learn the right lessons and not learn the wrong lessons. And he uses the analogy of a cat on a hot stove, right? If a cat sits on a hot stove, you can be sure that he will never sit on a hot stove again. But it may also be the case that he'll never sit on a cold stove, right? So I want to thank everyone for joining today. Again, it was our first test in an in-person event. There may be fatigue, North Korea fatigue in Washington, but there's certainly not fatigue amongst Korea and Asia watchers. Certainly people braved this chance to leave the comfort of their room to attend a in-person event. So I thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the panelists who came from Korea, as well as those who are participating remotely from Montana and Oregon. I also want to thank my colleague Lucy Stevenson Yang for help putting the event together, as well as the Embassy of the Republic of Korea. Thank you again.